Hi there, it's Jennifer, and I'm so glad you're joining me today. In this video, I am sharing some fun and unique embossing folder techniques. These are techniques that work with 3D embossing folders, 2D embossing folders, and, embossing folders that have some coordinating products too. A little bit of everything. Now, I have 4 cards for you in this video, and stay tuned to the end because I will show you a sneak peek to a video I have coming out soon, the cards that are in those, and that includes even more embossing folder techniques. But let's get started with today. All of my cards today use the new Gina K kit. This is the Autumn Delight card kit. I use her kits a lot for a couple reasons. One, it's an amazing value, and this gets you a free gift, which you can see in the bottom right corner, which I'll use today, and another free gift, and all that information is in the YouTube description below. Now, I also like her kits because it has a variety of styles in it, so you can get a lot of different looking cards out of the one kit. Now, looking closer at it, you have 2 large 6x8 stamp sets. You have coordinating dies, you can see even for the sentiments. You have a circle mask stencil, which is really cool, and I show that in my next video. You have a layering stencil set, and you also have a bonus free 3D embossing folder along with the coordinating die and stencils for that. So really a lot in here, and I'll be using quite a few of these products today and even more in my next video. My first 3 cards focus on that 3D embossing folder, stencils, and coordinating die that come free with this kit. So here are those products. I'm starting out by putting a piece of white cardstock into that embossing folder. I'll explain what a 3D embossing folder is in a moment. I do like to mist both sides of the cardstock with water. It gives you a better impression, but it's not always necessary. You'll just have to try it out with what cardstock and machine you're using. Now I'm running this through my Gina K Intri-Cut machine. I love the Intri-Cut because it has these dials, so you don't have to worry about sandwiches all the time. So I'm putting the settings to 2D embossing folder, and the instructions on the packaging say 3 for the dial for the amount of pressure, but for me I found 2 worked better for 3 with my particular machine and the cardstock I'm using, so you'll just have to experiment. Also, with this 3D embossing folder and this die cut machine, you don't need a top plate, and all that is on the packaging that comes with this embossing folder. Now, if you have a different die cut machine, by all means, you can use this folder with it. You just follow the manufacturer's instruction for a thick 3D embossing folder. I like the Intri-Cut because I can really adjust the amount of pressure to get it just right, and I always get great results with it. So here I've run it through, and check out that beautiful background that you get. I feel like this one you could make holiday or non-holiday. I'm going for non-holiday looks today. Now I mentioned that this is a 3D embossing folder, so it's much thicker than a traditional embossing folder. On the left you have a traditional, which I'll use in a moment. On the right you have the 3D. This is very thick, but I found it works with every machine that I've ever used. For my first technique, I'm actually going to use both types of embossing folders on one background for a double embossing technique. I'll start with the traditional or 2D embossing folder. This is the thinner type of folder, so I just adjust my setting to be 0 pressure with the 2D embossing folder setting. But this works with any machine you may have. I'm putting a piece of plain white cardstock into the Gina K Swiss Dots embossing folder. This is one of my most used embossing folders. Highly recommend it. And you get this beautiful dot pattern that works with really any style of card. Now I'm taking that same background that we just did the dots on, and I'm putting that into the 3D embossing folder that I showed you that has the stems and berries on it. And I'm running that through my die cut machine. And what happens is you get this double embossed look. You have those dots that aren't as raised as they were originally because we put it through the 3D embossing folder, but you definitely see them. So you have raised dots and those raised branches, and it is beautiful. Here's a comparison to a piece of cardstock where I only did the 3D embossing folder. So on the left I did both, on the right I did only the 3D. And I'll show you a better comparison when we add some ink to it so you can see it better. Let's get started with this card where I do that double embossing folder technique, but I add ink to it. So I'm starting out with a piece of white cardstock and placing it into the 2D Swiss dot embossing folder. And I'm running that through my die cut machine to add the pressure. By the way, this is big enough that you can put a 5x7 panel in it. So this will give us that fun dot pattern. Again, it works with any style of card. Before we add on to this, the 3D embossing folder with the branches, I thought it'd be fun to add some ink to those raised dots. So I'm placing it onto my grip mat, and I am rolling on top of it using a Holtz Brayer, some Gina K ink. This is the powder blue color. I'm very lightly applying this ink on top. You could go direct to paper instead if you prefer. Just take the ink pad and lightly brush it over the surface. And that will just put ink on the raised dots only, not on the background. So basically, we have white cardstock with raised blue dots. Now I'll take that piece and put it into our 3D embossing folder. But first I'm putting a little bit of glue tape on the back, so just a little tape runner or little glue dots. And I'll run that through my die cut machine. Again, adjusting the machine for a 3D embossing folder. Now when I run this through, it'll be kind of hard to see the pattern because we have those bold dots, right? Because we just inked those raised dots. And you'll just barely see the branches in there. But don't worry, I'm going to make them stand out even more. Before I remove that cardstock, which is temporarily glued in there, on the other side of the embossing folder, I will apply Blue Sky ink from Gina K. I just kind of rub that around over that embossing folder and then kind of tap it on. This is the side of the embossing folder where the background is raised up. I then close it and run through the die cut machine again, and look at that. We now have ink in the background. It's beautiful. Now I want that to be a little more vibrant, so I'm repeating the process. The reason I put a little bit of glue tape on the back of that cardstock before we put it in the embossing folder is it's going to stay in the same place, so I can repeat this process and it doesn't mess up our image. And look how beautiful the results are. You can see our leaves better, right? But we're going to make them stand out even more by adding some ink to those leaves and berries using the coordinating stencils that come with the kit. So I'll take my background and I'll place it onto my Gina K grip mat, which by the way, on the other side are 2 background stamps, which is brilliant. I will take the first stencil and that I'll place on top of our background. This does half of the leaves, and I will do these leaves using 2 shades of Gina K ink. I will first do a quick application, a light application of her key lime ink. Then I will come in with a smaller blending brush and put a bit of a heavier application of Lucky Clover ink at the base of each of those leaves. After doing that, I will come in with a little bit of her Christmas pine and put that really just at the tips of those leaves. So we kind of go from dark, medium to light, starting at the base of the leaf and blending out to the tip of the leaf. This gives a nice highlight and gives the look of dimension in the end, but you could use one color if you prefer. Now let's move on to the second of the 3 stencils for this. Now this one includes the berries, so I just put some temporary tape over the berries, and that way I can just easily ink up those leaves without having to worry about it. Now once I've masked those off, I'll place them on top, and this time I'll use a different shade of green so we have some variety in the leaves. This time I'm using Jelly Bean Green lightly for the first base, and then for the darker areas I'm using the Fresh Asparagus. And I'll just kind of let that blend out to that lighter color at the tips of the leaves. I just love how these stencils make that 3D embossing folder of the branches come alive. Now for that same stencil, I will remove the tape from the berries, and now we'll ink up the berries alone. So I'll line those up, and then I will carefully use a small Gina K brush to add powder blue ink to the berries, and then I'll come in with in the navy color, which is darker, and add a little bit of shading to them. Now you could do red if you wanted to make this holiday. You could do a lighter color if you want to make it spring, completely up to you. Now for the third stencil, I'll come in with the chocolate colored ink and I'll apply that over all of the branches. By the way, a lot of people ask, do I prefer to do the stenciling first, then the embossing folder, or the embossing folder, then the stenciling? I much prefer to do the embossing folder first, then the stenciling. Now I do like to put it back into the embossing folder, and it kind of fits on like a puzzle piece onto the raised pattern, and run it through again. After you've put all that moisture in with the inks, I feel like running it through again just adds back the dimension and detail and is worth taking a few seconds to do. So now here is our beautiful background. You have the raised dots and then the even higher raised branches and berries. And it's just such a fun, unique look. So this is the first background for my first card. I did do another background off screen. This background was done in the same way, but I skipped the dot embossing folder. So all I did on that one was put the blue ink into the 3D embossing folder and run that through a couple of times, and then use the stencils to add the coloring on top. So we have two different backgrounds with two different looks. The one on the left took a little more effort because we did the 2D embossing folder, but I think it really steps it up. Now let's do a third technique. I have a piece of white cardstock here that I've run through the 3D embossing folder already. I'm putting a little bit of temporary tape on the back and popping it back into the folder, fitting it onto the pattern. On the other side of the embossing folder, I'll apply that blue sky ink. You could really do any dye ink here. They all work great. I will then close that and run it through again. This will keep that branch pattern but add some blue ink into the background. Now I want to make that a little more intense, so I'm repeating the process. You could do a variety of colors on here if you wanted to, but I'm just sticking to that same blue sky ink. I'll close this up and run it through again. Now it'll look a little uneven and splotchy right now, but remember Gina K Ink smooth out and even over time, and it'll end up looking like the background that you see on the right. This time, I'm not going to put any of the stenciling color on it. I'm going to leave all the leaves and berries completely white and have the background be the blue. So we have three different looks from the same embossing folder and just kind of changing up the techniques a little bit. Now, as I give you a closer look at these, keep in mind this can be done with any embossing folders, whether they're thick or thin, it really doesn't matter. But if you intend to use two together, like I did for the background on the left, I do recommend one that has more of a repeated small pattern and then one that has a bigger look like these branches. It just helps to get a great result. All right, let's finish off our first card. Now on this one, I also use the coordinating die that works with that 3D embossing folder and stencils and is also included in that kit. Now I use the die to cut from white cardstock, and then I put a little bit of glue tape on the back of the leaf die cut, and I'm placing it into the embossing folder on the side where the leaves are raised. I will then close that and run that through my die cut machine just as we did before, and this will put the raised details into that die cut, and it's just beautiful. I'll show you another way to do this in a moment. After doing the die cutting and the embossing folder, I like to line up the stencil to add the ink. Now you don't really need to use the stencils here, but it really makes it easy. Now some people prefer to do the stenciling first, then the die cutting, then the embossing folder, or the die cutting, then the stenciling, then the embossing folder, but I always like to do the stenciling last. I feel like it gives the best results and it gives that look of dimension and really kind of picks up the highlights that the embossing folder adds. So I'm doing the same inking that you saw me do onto the background earlier, but we have the single die cut, which you could use on any card. Next, we'll need a sentiment for this card. So I'm using one of my older favorites from Gina K. This is the Thanks and Shadow dies. I use this a lot. In fact, it's stuck inside of my cabinet because I use it so much and I want to grab it quickly. I die cut Thanks from white cardstock and inked it with the denim blue ink so it'll match our background, and I added it to a white cardstock shadow. That shadow die cut really allows it to stand out. I also used the Gina K Master Layouts 8 die set. This is an older one, but I use it often for the different basic dies included. But from this, I chose a long rectangle die that has faux stitching on the inside edge, and I cut that from white cardstock. I'll have that come out from the top corner of our card. I did trim my background down and added it to a white note card that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. Then I'm adding this faux stitched rectangle to the top left corner. And then I will take our embossed and inked branch die cut, and I will glue that up in the top left corner, lining it up with the same shape of branch that's on our background. I'm using Gina K liquid adhesive. This is the Connect adhesive. I love this stuff. I use it on every card, and I can be sure that it'll hold this dimension on our card. So see how I'm lining up this die cut with the same branch that's in the background. And I'll put something heavy on it and a magnet to make sure it stays in place. Now, the reason I put that white rectangle back there is I wanted a kind of a landing spot for our sentiment. I'll place the sentiment kind of on top of the bottom of that rectangle, and it really makes it stand out more. Without that white rectangle back there, it just would get lost in the background. So here's a look at our completed card. I didn't add any embellishments to this because I felt like there's so much texture going on that there's no need for anything else. So we have the double embossing folder background where we did the dots and the branches. Then we did the branch die cut that we did the embossing folder and inking on, and then we added our sentiment on top. So you can see how using two embossing folders on one background can create something special. All right, now let's skip to the third background that I did, where we just used white cardstock in the embossing folder and added blue ink in the folder to transfer to the background. I wanted to keep this card very simple, and I thought it'd be fun to add an embossed die cut that I did with metallic cardstock. So I have a piece of silver metallic cardstock. My personal favorite right now is from Spellbinders. It's the Spellbinders Silver Treasured Cardstock Pack that has a variety of different silver specialty cardstocks, and the matte silver in there is gorgeous. I die cut that with the branch die cut, and this time I'm placing it into the embossing folder right into where you have the impression of the leaves. And I'm laying it in there and then closing the embossing folder and running it through my die cut machine. And look at the beautiful faux metallic die cut that you get. It looks like an embellishment, but it's made out of cardstock. Before I show you the completed card, let me show you the stamp set and coordinating dies that I used for the sentiment. This is included in the kit that I showed you at the beginning of the video. I chose the Sending Love and Gratitude sentiment. So I stamped Sending Love and Gratitude with the denim blue ink on white cardstock, and I used the die to cut it out. I did trim my background down to be a bit smaller than my white 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card. And on that white note card, I used the Swiss Dot embossing folder. Then on top of all of that, I used our silver die cut, and I added our sentiment along with some silver gemstones. It's a very simple card that didn't take long to put together, but it is beautiful in real life and is something you could do in a variety of colors with a variety of 3D embossing folders and coordinating dies. And then here is our final card. This is the one I did off screen, where I did the blue ink in the embossing folder and then used the stencils. I kept the rest of it very simple, adding the thanks and shadow die cut and a sentiment from the kit. I love that she includes the coordinating dies for those sentiments. It makes it easy to add onto your card. By the way, if you're looking for more products that work with the techniques I just showed you, where you can use a 3D embossing folder and coordinating stencils and dies together, I encourage you to check out the new Sunflower Bundle from Gina K. I will have it linked below. I didn't use it in this video, but it definitely would work with all the techniques that I just showed you, and I hope to use it in another video soon. Okay, let's move on to my final card example, and then I'll give you a preview of what I'll show in my next video. But on this card, I'll show you how to use an embossing folder just to add a little interest to any inked background, whether it's stenciled or stamped. I will also show you how to do a diagonal gatefold card. It's surprisingly easy. Now this card is A6 size, so it's 4.5 by 6 1/4 inches. So I'm starting with a piece of white cardstock of that size. I will then cut diagonally across this. Really, you can cut it at whatever angle that you want. I tried to do 2 pieces that are similar. Now we will do layering stencil on both of these pieces, and I tried to do the same on both pieces. These layering stencils, again, are from the kit that I showed you earlier, but if you don't have stencils like this, you could do stamping, other types of stenciling, really anything you want. Now over this first stencil, I will put a light to medium application of the light carnation ink. And then I will come in and add a little bit of depth by adding a bit of the medium carnation ink towards the base of the flower petals. Because I want to kind of do the same thing on both halves of this card, I'll take a picture of where the stencil is on this one. Then I'll remove this piece from my grip mat, add the other piece to it, and try to get the stencil in kind of the same position and ink it in the same way. I kind of wanted to have a mirror look between the two halves of this card, but if you prefer, you could just do an entire scene, like a giant stencil over the entire background, then cut it. Completely up to you. Now I'm coming in with the next stencil. This does the stems, and I'm using Lucky Clover over the entire stencil. I actually will come back later and add a darker color to it, but at this point, I'm just doing the same Lucky Clover over both halves of the stencil, and it's easy to line this up. Remember, there is a coordinating die that will cut this out, but I'm not using that today. Now over the third stencil, which is what adds details to the petals, I am using dark carnation at the base of it and then medium carnation over the rest of it. So this just stands out a little bit over the first layer of flowers that we did. And then I will come in with a little bit of the cherry red and put that at the base of the petals for even more contrast. Then I will do the exact same thing to the other half of the card. The final stencil just adds more layers to the leaves. I'll place that on top, it's easy to line up, and I'll put key lime ink that just gives a lighter shading to it. It was at this point, after doing both halves, that I thought it'd be nice to have a darker shade to the stems. So I'm going to go back to the stem stencil, reline it up, and add a bit of the Christmas pine just here and there, not really taking any time or effort to get it in just the right spot. I'm just wanting to add the look of dimension or depth to these flower stems. So I tried to do the same thing on both halves of this card panel. Now they're not really a mirror image. If you wanted a mirror image, you could have flipped the stencils over for the second half and done some inking that way. But I just wanted two that looked really cool, kind of facing each other there in the center. Off screen, I've created two side folding A6 white note cards. So these are 4.5 by 6.25 inches. On the first one, I'll add our top panel, and with this, I will line up the left edge of our inked panel with the fold line of the card. Then the bottom panel, I'll glue onto the other note card, but this time I'll rotate my note card around so that when I glue this panel down, the right edge lines up with the fold line. So this card is kind of upside down from what we usually do. So we have these two cards. The left card has the fold line on the left-hand side. The right card has the fold line on the right-hand side. Now on each of these, I will cut away the front of the note card that isn't covered by that inked panel. So I'm just using my scissors to cut a little bit along the fold line and then cut diagonally from one. And then I will do the same thing from the other. So we'll end up with these two funny note cards that have these little diagonal flaps on them. Now there are other ways you can create a diagonal gatefold card like this, but I found this to be the easiest. So now we have these two note cards. One is kind of upside down, but what happens is they'll fit together to create a diagonal gatefold card. So I will open up the first card, the one on the left, put liquid adhesive on the inside, and then take the other one and place it on the inside. Wiggle them together until those diagonal edges line up, and there we have our gatefold card. Now I like to give a little definition to that diagonal line. Now I could leave this card as is, but I thought I would step this up by using an embossing folder. I should have done this earlier, but I just thought about it at this point. So I'm going to pull away those two panels on the front, and I'll place them into that Swiss dot embossing folder. So this is something that you can do with any background you create. Add texture using an embossing folder. I recommend an embossing folder like the Swiss dot one. That's a small repeated pattern, so it's not too distracting. Now I put these two pieces into the embossing folder and I'll run it through, and that gives us that dot texture. For now, I'm going to leave it with that dot texture, but later I'll show you a way to step it up that's super easy to do. But for now, I'll just glue those two halves back onto our note card. Again, I could have done the embossing folder earlier before I glued this all together. I just didn't think of it at the time. Now it's time to add a little definition between the two diagonal halves. I cut two thin strips of gold metallic cardstock. These strips were cut from the Spellbinders Treasured cardstock pack. I mentioned the silver one earlier. I used the gold this time. And I'm putting those right along the diagonal edge, and then I'll make sure they line up nicely there in the middle, and I'll cut off the excess. By the way, those Spellbinders Treasured cardstock packs have a variety of specialty cardstock in them, and I find they're very high quality, and you can use embossing folders and dies on them with no problem at all. Now for sentiment, I'm using a much older die set from Gina K. This is the Hello and Shadows die set. I cut Hello from the same gold metallic cardstock and the Shadow from white, and I'm putting glue only on the left half, so it only glues to that top left part of the gatefold card. Then underneath that, I will gold heat emboss Friend. The word Friend is from this Gina K Fall Silhouettes stamp set and the coordinating die set. I really like the images in this. I will be using it on my next video, but for now I'm only using the word Friend, which I gold heat emboss on white and cut out with the coordinating die. That'll get glued right below the word Hello, but on the bottom right panel of our card. Here we have our completed card. I do have an A6 envelope that will fit this card, and I'll link to that source below. And you can see how nicely this opens up and it stands on display. Now, I could add embellishments, but I felt like it had enough interest. Here you can see the dot embossing folder and our fun sentiment and gold metallic details. Now, you could leave this as is, but I wanted to show you how to step this up, and this is one of my favorite embossing folder techniques. I will take a sanding block, which is basically kind of like sandpaper on all four sides. You could use sandpaper if that's what you have, but I really like having these sanding blocks in my stash. I will link to the ones I use below. And I will gently rub this over the inked surface. And what happens is it kind of sands off the ink that we applied on it. So we will end up with white dots in all of the areas where we did inking. It's just sanding that bit of ink off of those raised dots. So now we have textured white dots over the entire card, even in the areas that we inked. It's really easy to do. I use these sanding blocks for a lot of different things, including kind of sanding away little fingerprints that I get from ink. But this is just a great way to step up your inked embossing folder backgrounds. So you could have left it without the sanding, but by sanding the raised dots, they stand out even more. So after doing that standing, you can see our final card and how we can see those little white dots and that texture along our inked background. So you could stamp a background, stencil a background, do whatever you want, and then do the embossing folder and sand away the ink that you've added on top. It's just a fun way to use your embossing folders along with other products that you have. Now before I go, I wanted to show you a little preview of my next video, as I promised. This again uses the same products from the Gina K kit that I've been using throughout this video, but I show you a different way to use your embossing folders to step up what would otherwise be very simple card designs. So be sure to come back and check that video out. Again, it uses the Gina K kit. If you have interest in anything that I used today, I do have it all linked below in my YouTube description. I also have information on how to get free gift from Gina K Designs. At the end here, I'll link to 2 related videos if you're looking for some more inspiration, and I will link to my blog where I'll have photos and more information about these cards. I thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again soon with another video.